So Academy Award-winning filmmaker William Friedkin decided to jump in on the 90s trend of erotic thrillers with a film that failed to meet up to expectations and became highly neglected on home video, especially in its unrated form. So let's see what the legacy is on Jade. So in the 1980s up through the end of the 1990s, we had the rising trend of erotic thrillers in cinema, with hits such as Body Heat, 9.5 Weeks, Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct, Bound, and Eyes Wide Shut. But of course you always had that sort of like direct-to-video late-night cable market where they're making some of them are pretty impressive, some are pretty good, but they're just there to make that sort of titillation, that late-night exploitative type of cinema to you guys. But you always had that sort of like thing where you had Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct both making over $300 million at the box office, making a lot of studios really want to capitalize and really trying to capture that sort of success again. And that's where a screenplay writer, Joe Ezterhas, comes in the mix of this whole thing, who wrote Basic Instinct, but also wrote something like Sliver, which didn't go over very well and had a lot of problems in its production. Also has a very complicated home video history where Paramount Pictures cannot get the aspect ratio right on the film to put it out properly on physical media. But also had the entire thing coming up in 1995. Here you both have Jade, which the film we're talking about, and Showgirls that he also wrote, which was a massive, notorious bomb. Got all the Razzie Awards that year and kind of almost crippled a lot of different studios, including Caruso Pictures, which kind of went bankrupt, had to sell the film off to other producers and distributors just to get it out there, and even still lost tons of money. It's just been one of the biggest stories of just a film just went absolutely full out with his ambition, with another massive budget on his end, and just utterly failing on all levels possible. But the one that doesn't get quite talked about as much is Jade, coming from, of course, Academy Award-winning filmmaker William Friedkin, who won for French Connection, went off to did The Exorcist, which also got him nominated, but having a bit of a up and down sort of career at that point in time, going off and doing films like Sorcerer and To Live and Die in L.A. and a few other things here and there that some have become sort of cult hits, and some things are very well regarded in retrospect, but not all of them really became box office successes or weren't as well received critically at the time. So some people kind of labeled it as sort of like The Exorcist curse, like it had this big hit, French Connection, The Exorcist, and everything just didn't quite get as much traction going on after that, especially up to the point of doing Jade, a film that cost roughly about $50 million, but only returned about $9.9 million at the box office, making it a major box office failure and a critical failure as well. And it's the interesting sort of nexus point type of films. One of those types of films, like you see a lot of like turns or sort of like a milestone in a certain way towards certain careers, where there's like a lot of rising stars going into this film that didn't quite hit it off after this. Sort of a thing like they almost kind of stopped a lot of different things cold for a lot of people, or just hit a stumbling block to a certain point in time, because main star of the film is David Caruso. And this is right after he just made a major star for himself as a star of NYPD Blue, but because he felt like he was such a big star coming out of that he decided to leave the series and become a big movie star. But between Jade and his other film released the same year, Kiss of Death with Nick Cage, neither film performed, neither film had good critical action, so it really kind of tanked his career up until 2002 when he gets CSI Miami. So trying to hit it big and trying to pair with some movie stars and a big director and stuff like that really just went completely on the ruins for him. And then you got someone like Linda Fiorentino, rising star. She had just done The Last Seduction, a fantastic film noir, femme fatale film from John Dahl, who had done Red Rock West. A lot of other films that got a lot of acclaim, but because that film kind of went to HBO, couldn't get Oscar nominations despite some pushback from the studio and the filmmakers, tried to get that on to her credit there. Still got a lot of good critical reaction, got a lot of good buzz for it, but rising star. I think like, okay, guys, she did this one really good erotic thriller, got a lot of acclaim, moves into this thing, seems like a no-brainer situation, clear win for, again, doesn't make the thing, doesn't make the traction. So it's like everything just kind of like seems like it's gonna spark off really big for a lot of different people. It feels like it's just gonna happen. It's just gonna happen for Friedkin, Caruso, Fiorentino. Got Chazz Palminteri. He's absolutely fantastic in pretty much everything he does. He's kind of a Teflon type of guy. It's like he keeps doing great films, great performances, comes out great. Same year he does The Usual Suspects, where he's absolutely phenomenal in. So it's like, it feels like it should. I feel like the press is there, the people involved with it are going to hit it off and get it off in the right ways. But for a reason, it just doesn't catch on. It doesn't get the traction it needs from box office, doesn't get anywhere else on the entire thing, from critical reactions. Everyone's just calling it like it's an incomprehensible mess. The film doesn't work. Even Michael Biehn, who's in the film as a supporting actor, is the one that cops in the film, who ends up being a traitor and duplicitous and stuff like that later on, had bad things to say about it in retrospect. He felt like the script was a jumbled mess. He didn't feel like it was very coherent of a story. He really didn't know what anyone was really doing in the entire story or on the film itself. It just felt like a really bad experience. After he already worked with Friedkin on another film of his that's extremely freaking obscure called Rampage, which has almost no presence on home media. So it's just like a very troubled production to a certain degree, because even though Joe Ezterhas, major screenplay writer, kind of had the entire conflict with William Friedkin, who actually came in and rewrote pretty much his entire script, barely leaving a trace of anything he wrote in the film. But because Ezterhas at this point in time has got Basic Instinct to his name, major success, you still want to have his name involved to have a little bit of that press on it. So, avoiding having him take his name off the whole thing, he was given a $2 to $4 million sort of blind writing deal with Paramount Pictures, which I don't think went off too well after this, and Showgirls really bombed. He doesn't have a whole lot of credits after this point in time, but the fact of the matter is, we're talking about Jade today because its presence on home video is very uneven, to say the least. Because after the thing bombs at the box office, they decide, okay, we're going to give it a run on home video, and it doesn't go off well on that regard because they put on the theatrical cut on laserdisc and VHS, but they put on an unrated version on VHS. But because the thing performed so badly on home video, they canceled the release for the laserdisc version of the unrated version, which, even though on the VHS it says unrated extended home video version, doesn't specifically mention director's cut. If you look at it on streaming sources now, it is labeled as a director's cut. So even if it wasn't labeled then, it is now, similar to what Friedkin did it with The Exorcist, where it was originally like the version you've never seen before. Later on, his mind gets changed when he's dealing with William Friedkin and the whole thing, and adopts it as his proper director's cut of the film. So if that's changed over the times, it's labeled that now. But the thing is, it's kind of relegated to analog video or standard definition video, because when you get the DVD, it's still just the theatrical cut. And also the thing is, apparently Friedkin at the time didn't want it out in widescreen. He wanted it out in a 4:3 format. Probably because the resolution on analog video being what it was, you get better resolution just using the full vertical resolution of the 4:3 frame. But the fact of the matter is, when you go off and compare it to the later widescreen version that are put out for the Blu-ray and the streaming services, it's actually cropped in on the sides. It's not open matte. It's actually being panned and scanned. So that's very objectionable. That you're not getting more picture, you're getting less picture by doing that. Probably because they shot the film maybe hard matted to 1:8:5:1 instead of, like, again, soft matting after the fact you shoot it full frame. They probably did a hard mat on the whole thing, so that's why the film was probably presented that way. So it's just, again, another thing on the line of things where it's like, okay, the theatrical cut is the only thing released on DVD. It's the only one released on Blu-ray, and when you get up to streaming sources, you still got the HD version of the theatrical cut, but the director's cut is relegated to standard definition video only. Despite what Vudu's trying to tell you that it says they have an HD version, reports say it's not a true HD version. It's probably upscaled or very low quality, but also the fact of the matter is, standard definition video is not well represented on streaming services because the compression absolutely kills the quality of the video. It looks absolutely inferior to the DVD, which again is only 4:3 and it's the theatrical cut, but the encoding on the whole thing, the bit rate is much stronger, so it looks a lot better. So you're comparing this stuff, it's not very good. And the fact is, what we're getting at here is that director's cut, this unrated version, is actually the better version of Jade. Now, the plot of the film centers around the murder of a prominent San Francisco businessman and art collector, Kyle Medford, who, as the plot unfolds and stuff like that, finds out he's involved with sex scandals, prostitutes, extortion, and reaches up to the governor, who's portrayed by Richard Crenna, who has certain machinations going on in the entire thing, trying to shut up suspects, kill people, head off the entire homicide investigation, which is headed up by David Corelli, assistant district attorney, portrayed by David Caruso, who's also involved with, at least was involved with, Katrina Gavin, the wife of Chazz Palminteri's character of Matt Gavin, who's also a defense attorney. And the entire plot weaves around in all these different places, again, uncovering a prostitute ring and stuff like that, and finding out there's this very prominent, mysterious prostitute called Jade that's not afraid, not shy about doing all these extreme sexual types of things, and really rocks the world of all these guys, all these prominent businessmen and the politicians and stuff like that, very deeply involved with that whole thing. Turns out to be Katrina Gavin, Linda Fiorentino's character in the film, so all the suspicion lays on her. Her fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, which was an art piece that she says she handled earlier in the same day when she was invited over to Medford's house to look at some art pieces before going out of town. And she's also this clinical psychologist dealing with blind rage and all these different things going on. So a lot of interesting thriller aspects to the whole thing that does add in the eroticism. A lot of graphic sexualness in the entire film that really kind of stimulates certain parts of the audience. But watching the theatrical, you can just feel like there's certain elements that are supposed to link up stronger than they should, but they don't. It feels kind of scattershot in a certain way. It feels like the elements are kind of shooting out from the stem of the plot, but they don't feel like they completely dovetail back in to kind of interlock and make everything make sense to a certain degree. Because you got the whole thing with Richard Crenna's character, the governor, and his right-hand man, portrayed by the fantastic character actor Holt McCallany, doing all these things again to trying to head off the investigation and trying to play the politics and all these different things and trying to strong-arm David Corelli and stuff like that. So it feels like that plot just kind of takes almost like a detour around the main plot to a certain degree and doesn't really integrate as much into it in the theatrical cut. But the main thing is when you get into the unrated cut, it does start just adding few things in here that feel like they make more sense. They kind of flesh out ideas. They also flesh out much more the character relationships. You get David Corelli and Katrina Gavin here, who are old flames, but of course she married Corelli's best friend and Matt Gavin, so they're still adding a little something extra at the beginning of the thing. Her warning him about getting involved with what Kyle Medford was involved with, that he had a lot of enemies and a lot of things would come out of this thing that could really tank him when he's kind of looking to go up and be elected to district attorney himself. So it's the entire thing where they start out with that, and they also have this entire thing where he ends up having this informant because they find this sort of like jewelry box type of thing that has pubic hairs in it from all the prostitutes and stuff like that that Medford kept on a dresser or whatnot. So there's that mark of Jade on there, but he doesn't know what it is yet. He wants to find out, so he goes to a Chinese informant, where the unrated version actually explains that he goes into court and gets him off on a sort of charge or whatnot or something like that. He gets him released from prison in order to kind of help him out in this entire situation, to kind of do him a favor as he's doing him a favor. So it's a kind of a nice expanded beat of story there that kind of further exemplifies his point as a district attorney, and also further informs a lot of things, just him as a character to a certain degree, what his standards are, what he's looking to do in this entire situation. And the film just keeps going on to a certain degree, just adds in more things again between David Corelli and Katrina and her husband Matt, and various other little things, again, getting that more of that stuff involved with the governor and how he's kind of trying to manipulate the situation here and there. It kind of just integrates the plot elements and kind of further fleshes out the character stuff as the film goes along to make it a much fuller film to a certain degree. It makes more sense. It feels like it has much more meat to the bone to it to really kind of flesh out how the characters are interacting, how the story is going along, and kind of improves the flow in some places, but some places it feels a little on the jarring side to a slight bit of degree, so it's not a perfect edit, but I feel like there's just beats in there that feel like they inform the audience more about how the characters are working out, how they're progressing through the story, and how they're communicating things between one another. It just feels a little bit more, shows more angles to the story to a certain degree, because in the theatrical cut it feels like it's just David Corelli's story. When you add these other scenes in, it feels like there's more stuff for Matt Gavin, more stuff for Katrina Gavin, more things going on in the entire thing to get more elements kind of integrated into the story in a general sense, so it feels like a much fuller film to that degree. But the biggest change involved with these two different versions of the film is the ending of the film, because as you're going along in the entire plot, you have the main suspect as being Katrina there, but as the governor's people, they're starting to involve themselves more and more, and they're also trying to frame her for the killing of a witness portrayed by Angie Everhart, another prostitute that was involved with Medford. Get the entire thing where you start to turn the corner and trying to think that, okay, by the end of the film when they're trying to go off and kill Katrina, you think that they're involved with the entire thing. They're the ones that actually killed Medford or something else like that. But as the film comes to its conclusion, you find out that it was Matt Gavin, Chazz Palminteri's character, who actually did kill Medford and was involved with knowing about the entire blackmail thing, all the extortion, and also everything involved with Jade. All these photographs, all the blackmail material, whatnot. He killed him because he didn't want all the stuff coming out as a scandal for him, so he did that to protect his wife, but also to protect himself. And you can see as the entire film goes along, as this very prominent defense attorney, the guy is very much an alpha male, always being in control of the situation, always playing the power play, stuff like that, is always very much a guy in control of the situation, so he's very much a domineering force to a certain degree. You can definitely see as the film goes along, there is problems with the marriage. He is an adulterer, stuff like that, and she knows all this type of stuff, so this machinations of the marriage and their infidelity and stuff like that is all part of this swirling thing that comes up to that drama at the end of the film, and the theatrical cut ends on that note. Him revealing to his wife, I'm the guy who killed him. I'm responsible for all this type of stuff, and I've known about this all the time. And next time we make love, introduce me to Jade. And the film cuts out. So he gets away with it in the theatrical cut. The unrated cut changes that, because it shows that David Corelli's outside with a listening device, listening in on the entire thing. So he gathers the evidence, gathers the audio evidence, the confession there, and goes off to arrest him at the end of the film, showing a full arc to his character to a degree in the film, because this little piece of the puzzle of the entire film, this little cufflink that Corelli finds at the murder scene at the beginning of the film, that loops back into the film every so often. He gives it off to one of the detectives, but says, don't follow the evidence. And it keeps swirling back. He doesn't want to reveal what the implication of it is, because he knows it's Matt Gavin's cufflink, and he can't rationalize the situation to put the pieces fully together to fully connect it all the way. Because even at a certain point in time when Katrina comes to him and starts making the moves on him, he says, you killed Kyle Medford. He thinks it's her. But it keeps coming back around, and it's like in the theatrical cut, it never closes that piece of the puzzle. It never comes back around. He just confronts the governor at the end of the film, and everything kind of goes off, and he doesn't capture the guy. He just thinks everything's just tied up in political machinations now, and there's nothing he can do, and he doesn't have the right guy. But the fact is, the unrated cut makes more sense because it ends an entire plot thread in the film that the theatrical cut just abandons. I don't know. I have no idea whatsoever what the edict, what the idea was behind why they did what they did with the theatrical cut. There's no idea whether it's runtime issues, if they had some other ideas going on, if it was studio situations. There's no information whatsoever why the theatrical cut exists the way it does. Why it doesn't include those plot elements that further flesh out the story and concludes a proper plot thread in the film that makes sense. So it's like we keep getting the evidence that he has the cufflink. And you can tell in Caruso's performance there is a specific implication about it because he won't reveal it to anyone because it's too deeply personal to him. But we never get the hook at the end to fully have his character come around to the entire thing of knowing what it is and acting upon it. And that's what the unrated version of the film does. And that makes it a much better film, because otherwise your protagonist of the film is just left out hanging and there's no resolution to his storyline. It's just kind of left dangling in the air, and you don't have anything off in that regard to conclude it properly. And so I just don't know why you would lead with the theatrical cut and not do the proper extended version of it that does fill out the plot better and makes it more coherent of a story, and just feels much more of a proper story overall. So it's like, of course, they would have to trim back some of the graphic sexualness that I unfortunately can't really show you here on YouTube because of all the standards and restrictions. But yeah, the unrated cut does add in a lot more sizzle. There's a lot more sex, there's a lot more graphic stuff going on, the whole thing, that definitely enhances the film to a certain degree, but you can still have all those other plot threads and those plot elements, those character development scenes in the longer version, which runs about an hour 47. Theatrical only runs about 95 minutes, so you're losing about 13 minutes worth of story and a few other bits of sizzle to the entire film going with that R-rated version. So in the Blu-ray, it's out of print. It was originally released through Lionsgate from Paramount when they had a licensing deal with Lionsgate to handle all their distribution of home video. It's out of print now. You can't get it. I think they did like a re-release of the DVD, which again is just 4:3 cropped down of the theatrical cut, so you're still not getting much on that regard. And the HD transfers, it's fine, it's serviceable, it's passable, it's not great. But again, if you want to watch the unrated version, what I feel is definitely the better version of the film. You've got to watch on some overly compressed standard definition stream that doesn't look all that good, and it's only in stereo sound and whatnot, where the DVD at least had 5.1 and the laserdisc had AC3 5.1 surround. So you're getting the lesser returns on things in terms of the quality of what you're getting to watch this film and experience it, because I think it's actually a pretty decent film. It's not great. I would not rank it anywhere in the top echelon of erotic thrillers. There's a lot more tense ones, more intense ones, just ones that had a lot more additional sizzle to them, and certainly a lot more mystique to them to a certain degree. But there's a whole slew of really bad ones you could really get into. I think Sliver's worse. I think Sliver is a mess. They had a lot of mess of production on the whole thing, where they had to change the ending to it, and then that thing didn't perform well at the box office. And that was another one written by Joe Ezterhas, like I said. So it's like, it took really special talent to make this genre very viable as a theatrical experience and stuff like that to really be massively successful. And you'd think Friedkin would have the tools, but the fact is, whatever he did just didn't seem to ring true to audiences, didn't grab things. Again, it could be a little dry in some places, especially very flat in the theatrical cut, where I don't feel like the elements do come together very well to make it as good as possible. But you always rely on Friedkin to make an incredible car chase sequence, where he does that on the very slopey streets of San Francisco, kind of trying to rival Bullet to a certain degree, which is a high mountain to climb. Gets up pretty far in the whole thing. It's a very intense, insane chase. I wouldn't want to be the stunt drivers in this goddamn thing. Hell no. But they do this little chase through this like Chinese parade or whatnot, but they always keep this sort of like Chinese sort of element, this atmosphere in the entire film with James Horner's score, which is also out of print. You can't get that anywhere. But they always kind of keep that as a motif for the entire film, visually, and some of the Chinatown sequences and stuff like that. So they're trying to weave that in as a sort of thematic element in the entire film. But it's a really good car chase, but a lot of the other stuff in the film doesn't excite as much. So it's a little on the procedural side, not quite as intensified as some other films in the genre could be, but I think it's pretty decent. I think it deserves a way better sort of treatment than it has gotten. I don't know if anything's ever going to happen for it, because again, there's no way it's recouped enough money to make a profit at this point in time. I mean, if you lose that much money at the box office, where you probably should have made over $100 million to really make a profit in the whole thing, fuck all, man. It's probably never going to make freaking profit. But I don't know. It's a Friedkin film. Friedkin stuff is done very well in certain places. Again, Friedkin's still a very, very outspoken and very popular and very relevant filmmaker. He still makes some very good films that have gotten a lot of acclaim over the last several years. So he's still active, and I would still say that he's got enough of a voice in the studio system in Hollywood that if he wanted something to happen for Jade, you probably would hear about it. You would definitely hear about him talking about it, want to pushing for it. But I don't think much has really kind of been said as much. I don't think as much has been pushed on it enough, because again, it's just one of these films that just didn't perform very well. and didn't go over very well. It was critically, and of course, once they get the unrated version, they kind of, most of the story's already been told about the entire film. It's been written off so much that it's almost like a footnote having the unrated version out there, but it really should be kind of talked about a little bit more than it has. So it's like, I would like to hear what you guys feel about it. If you've seen Jade, if you've seen both versions, definitely tell me what you feel works out between these two versions of the film. If you do feel like the film does deserve a little extra life. It doesn't have to be the biggest life on the planet or whatnot, but it feels like there should be another shoe to drop to just have this thing preserved to a certain degree, just have that unrated version, at least give it a nice HD transfer so we can have it. I don't know. I keep thinking in the back of my mind as I keep getting up to making this video, it's like, is Kino Lorber going to, no, it's like a 4K version, I'm going to have to stop the production of the entire video? Would be kind of a nice thing, because that's kind of what I'm kind of urging for here, but just for it to be remembered. So it's been kind of like brushed off to the side, it's been neglected on home video and stuff like that. It's been almost slightly forgotten if it wasn't for some things on streaming services. Kind of gets shuffled around, Paramount Plus and HBO Max and Showtime, stuff like that. It's certain packages they're selling off from Paramount or whatnot, but kind of gets here and there, but it's usually just the R-rated version. They're not kind of shuffling around the unrated cut. So that's very much the version that you really should be paying attention to, because again, I feel, especially with the ending of the film, it makes it make more sense. It makes it pay off the storyline so much. And I think it's just the version that has been neglected the most and really should be remembered better to a certain degree, because again, I just think the theatrical cut is just a little too thin, a little too disjointed to a certain degree. But let me know what you guys think about it, and throw your comments below about it. Always give me the thumbs up and the subscribe if you haven't. They're very much appreciated. But there's also the super thanks featured here on YouTube if you want to contribute something. If you find something here that you really love, you can throw a few bucks on that entire thing. And of course, there's always a Patreon. Contribute a little bit every month to get early access to everything we got going on here. So thanks so much, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.